I wish I loved this movie more than anything in the world. Let's talk about Obsession.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back. I am back. Kind of missed a few episodes, but today we're here to discuss Obsession. But before we get into Obsession, Daniel, do you want to give the people something that they should probably check out?
So I watched Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. So Walk Hard is a 2007 musical comedy film, which is essentially a parody of musical biopics. It follows the story of Dewey Cox, who grows up in Alabama in the 40s, and after accidentally killing his brother with a machete, his father kicks him out, and he has to make it as an independent musician. And the story follows him through his early struggles in life, his big break as a musician, and how he becomes one of the biggest musicians in the 50s and 60s. This whole thing is basically a very funny, very smart skewering of biopics, which basically makes fun of every cliche and every trope of biopics and how they portray the subject matters and how they are structured. And it's got a whole bunch of really clever jokes in it. And it really understands the genre it's parodying, which is a rare thing for satires in a lot of cases. But Walk Hard really gets this right. So if you just like smart comedies, if you like biopics, or if you dislike biopics, then Walk Hard is a pretty good watch.
That sounds right up your alley because if there's one thing that you are for sure to complain about and not want to do is a biopic. So I think that just like kind of riffing on biopics probably just tickles all the right spots for you.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It makes fun of all these different tropes about like there's a scene where that cliche in biopics where especially about musicians, where they are shown where they got their idea for their big hit, and it's often something really mundane and stupid. And here, every time he fights with his wife, it turns into a mega hit that makes him millions. Actually, will say something and it turns into a line from one of his big hits, right? Like at one point, she complains about how he's not providing for the family, and that turns into the song "Walk Hard" because it kind of leads him down this rabbit hole of he has to work harder than anybody else has ever before, so that he can achieve his goals and provide for his family and that sort of thing. So it's really dumb and really stupid and really funny. And so like it goes kind of down the list of all these different cliches. Like there's the reunion, there's the big falling out with a band, like all the big beats you've seen in kind of these kinds of movies. They're here and they're really dumb and really silly and really funny.
Well, I haven't watched too much, but I am kind of weekly checking into from season 4 and not through enjoyment, I would say. I think it's almost like through obligation now, where, and for anyone that doesn't know, From is a show where these people are kind of stuck in this town and there's these monsters outside, which means that they can't go out at nighttime when the monsters come out and they have no way of communicating with the outside world. They're kind of completely cut off. Essentially, they're trying to solve this mystery. Every episode, it's either you're getting more of the mystery or they're introducing something completely new or whatever the case might be. As a show, I actually think it's pretty bad in terms of like the first season is great when they're setting up the mystery and they're setting up the premise of it. But the more it goes on and the more you just kind of get stuck with the melodrama between characters and you just like everyone wants to have a heartfelt conversation, it's very draining to watch. So I actually have got to a point where I actually just kind of skip those scenes and I just like get to when we're actually figuring out what the mystery is or we're trying to like further that narrative. But I don't know, it's very difficult to do because every scene is some type of like heartfelt conversation between two characters. And I'm like, I don't care. Like I really don't care. Just like stop giving us this like melodrama that's in this and actually get to the point. And it'll be interesting to kind of see how it wraps up just because there's so many like fan theories and so many different like callbacks from previous episodes that people are trying to link to some of the new information that we're getting. Depending on how they execute it will kind of make me think, oh, like they were very clever and they really like wove the story really well from the start to the end, minus kind of like the character dialogue and stuff like that, but the actual like premise and the idea of it, they done it really well. Or I'm gonna be like, you just kind of wasted most of our time for a lot for all these seasons. And I think there's only one season left after this anyway, so this is meant to be a recommendation. It kind of half is because like the mystery is intriguing and like the mystery is like fascinating, even though it's quite frustrating how little answers you get and how little people that have answers talk to each other in the show. It's mind boggling, but it's still keeping me tuning in somehow week on week. So we'll see how it ends.
I've got a question.
Go for
Have
it.
you learned nothing in the last 20 years of watching television?
Clearly not. Clearly not.
Because it seems to me like it does everything wrong that these kinds of shows do wrong, right? Because like it sounds like it's dragging, like it's in season 4, there's no answers. It seems like it's running out the clock. It seems to be padding the story with melodrama and kind of characters just, they sound like filler scenes where people kind of talk about interchangeable feelings. I don't know. It seems to me like the kind of thing I would have dropped after like a season. So what does keep you coming back?
I just need to know if they get out and how they get out. If they get out in the end, and actually what this town is. Honestly, that's the only thing that keeps me coming back. Apart from that, I probably would have dropped it as well. When I saw season 4 was out, one, I was kind of like late to the party that season 4 was out because I wasn't really checking for it like that. And two, I didn't have the joy of like, oh, like, season 2 is out. I was like more like, oh, I'm familiar with the show. Instead of like me trying to find something else, something new to watch, it's like I'm familiar with it and there's a mystery that I still kind of want to solve in this show. So I'll kind of watch this out of obligation as opposed to trying something new.
Okay. I don't know. It just sounds a bit like every other mystery box show of the last 20 years. But it seems to me like the kind of thing where once everything is done and then I hear it was worth it, then I might check it out. But even then, it seems to be very padded and very drawn out.
Super padded. Super padded.
Okay. All right. Shall we move on to the main attraction?
Yeah, I guess we're here to discuss Obsession. So, Daniel, do you want to give the people a quick synopsis of what Obsession is?
So, Obsession is a supernatural horror movie about this guy, Baron, who has this crush on his coworker, Nikki. He finds himself unable to do anything about it. And then one day when he is in a store that sells these things that are supposed to grant you a wish, he wishes that she would love him more than anything else in the world. And it turns out that his wish gets fulfilled, but it kind of blows up in his face and the plot escalates from there. So what did we think of Obsession?
I really enjoyed this movie. I thought the idea and the kind of the premise behind having this kind of boy who may be a great match for this girl, but she maybe doesn't know it, or he's like a little bit too awkward and shy to kind of break out of the friend zone, trying to sort of find a way to tell her that his true feelings, and not knowing how to do it, and then kind of having to resort to this. It comes almost like innocence, like slash harmless wish of like him wishing her that she was in love with him, just kind of on a whim because he doesn't know how to say it to her, and then how that plays out and everything that could go wrong with sort of making a wish like that going wrong. I thought was all great. I actually really enjoyed the acting in this as well. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed the acting. It wasn't completely scary, but I think there was like certain scenes, and I think it's like kind of when she's kind of doing like weird things, like being in the corner of the room while he's sleeping. That she kind of just like does like really like weird and like random things. There's like one or two scenes which kind of just like sent a chill through my body while watching it, which I think was good. Do you know what I really appreciate actually is because this is almost like a possession movie. And sometimes you have like these movies where things are just happening to the main character and everyone around them is kind of not like impacted, or they don't get to witness the kind of like person that's possessed. They don't get to witness kind of the craziness behind the person. And then there's just like a particular scene where she's at a party and like she just can't help but be like this sort of obsessed person to the guy. And I just like loved everyone's kind of reaction to it. I thought that was great as well. I think probably best to kind of just like get into the nitty gritty of it. But I think overall this is like a really good, fun horror on the topic of love and like dating and stuff like that, which I think was very interesting.
I enjoyed this quite a bit, and I was dreading it a little bit because it sounded a bit like, from the trailers, it looked a little bit like this was about Bear being obsessed with Nikki and that being the conflict, right? And it's really not that. It's really about her becoming obsessed with him because of the effects of his wish, right? And that turns it into a very different kind of story than what you might expect it to be. And what this actually is, I think this is about Gen Z dating, because the first half hour or so is all about what happens before he gets his wish and how dysfunctional this entire friend group is and how not in touch with their feelings they are and how unable they are at navigating social situations and especially difficult situations. And so the wish is the only thing that allows them to do anything. It seems to me like the consequences of that are kind of the main topic of the movie. And I think the psychology of all these different characters is what really works about this movie. Not just Bear, but also Nikki and Ian and Sarah. And I think just as characters, I think they are very well realized and they all have their thing going on. And the possession or the effects of the wish basically just put them in a situation where they have to confront what they're really feeling and what they've been hiding away because it's too cringe or whatever. And I think that part really, really works. And I think that is the part that people really resonate with. So this currently has made 26 times its budget. I was in a full theater, which for small horror is unheard of, at least in my theater. Often there will be less than 5 people in the theater for movies like this, and this one was full. One thing I don't think that works so well is the effects of the actual possession. And I think that's one of the things we're going to talk about, because it seems to me like there doesn't seem to be really a theory behind what the effect is on Nikki. She just seems to do creepy and weird stuff that generally revolves around her being extremely clingy and obsessed and basically panicking every time Bear tries to put some kind of distance between them. But the specifics of what she does and how she does them, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, seem pretty random. And it seems a bit like they just brainstormed weird stuff for her to do, as opposed to exploring whatever entity is driving the possession. I think the movie is getting a bunch of credit for how striking those scenes are, and there certainly are that. But in terms of, once the shock wears off and you think about what just happened, I struggle to really find much there, specifically in Nikki's behavior. And because that is the focus of the entire middle of the movie, I think that is kind of a big deal. And that is kind of what soured my takeaway on the movie a little bit, even though the rest of it is so good. So let's talk about it.
Can you remind me actually, how did he actually phrase his wish? Because that then informs obviously how Nikki should have or did behave in the movie.
So the wish is, if I remember correctly, is I wish Nikki loved me more than anybody else or anything else in the world.
Which you would think is pretty harmless, and I think maybe we can kind of start on that front where we're kind of talking about the wish versus how she actually behaved, because people in love behave in loads of different ways, and there's loads of different kind of manifestations of how love can be portrayed by someone for someone. And I think what they kind of chose to do in this route was the ultra obsessed, ultra clingy route, and obviously that kind of matches what the movie and the title is meant to be, but it almost wasn't what her character was like before. It seemed like she was just kind of a little bit free and in herself, and she sort of didn't have those traits which would then be amplified by a possession, anything like that. But I don't know, what were your thoughts? Because obviously that was kind of one of the takeaways which you thought brought down the movie.
Yeah, so I think it's clear that this is not Nikki changing her behavior. This is an entity possessing her and making her do things that she has no input on, right? There's the scene where Bear tries to sneak away at night to talk to Sarah, and Nikki says, "Please kill me. She's asleep, and I can't bear this anymore," right? So that's the first time since the wish that this is the real Nikki talking. Everything else Nikki does and says is something else driving, right? So I think that is important here. The second thing is there are a couple of scenes where I think it makes sense. So for instance, when he goes to work and she stays home, she completely shuts down because without him around, she has no purpose. That is something that makes sense. The fact that she completely panics when he says he wants to just hang out with his friends for an evening and completely becomes unhinged and violent, that makes sense. When she just watches him while he sleeps, that makes sense. When this party game they're playing means that Bear should kiss Sarah, and Nikki basically makes her switch places because even that is too much jealousy for her. That makes sense. Things that don't really make sense is the thing about standing in the corner at night. It looks creepy, right? But where she comes out of the shadow and she talks weirdly, she says weird things. I forget what she says in the moment. But why does that lead to her standing in a corner as opposed to just sleeping next to him? Another one is there's a scene where I forget when exactly it is, but she kind of just moves in weird ways through the shadows. where it looks a bit like a ghost or a demon, like something out of, I don't know, like some kind of ghost movie. And it doesn't follow, like her being obsessed with him and her entire life revolving around him does not seem to map to that. Or even just the extreme mood swings, like where she's just grinning at him and she goes from screaming to trying to charm him like within seconds. I think those moments are all really striking, but they don't seem to follow from she's obsessed with him. And it seems to be like about 60% of the time it seems to be random weird stuff, and 40% of the time it's, yeah, that makes sense, that like this follows from the wording of the wish. So I thought that was a little bit weird, and maybe I just didn't get some nuance of what was going on. There seems to be a gap between those two things.
Yeah, I'm trying to think like how I took it. I kind of felt like, stuff like the mood swings was more her kind of being manipulative as opposed to kind of sort of being in love and like being obsessed with that person. And yeah, I kind of have to agree where it kind of moves on from being the most in love with this person to actually I'm manipulating this person to kind of do what I want and be the way that I want and just kind of like stick around, which doesn't 100% map all the way to the wish. You can kind of like, make some connections to it where, she kind of just wants him around and she's sort of trying to just be around him at like as much as possible, or just like doing whatever. But like you said, is like if you're the most in love with this person, then where's the parts where she's kind of considerate and she's like kind of caring in the way that she speaks to him? Where's the parts where she is trying to like kind of like dote after him or like cater to him in certain ways or whatever? It just kind of seems to be like she's maniacal anytime that he's trying to do anything other than spend time with her, which yeah, I don't know, there's like an element of like this entity or this being that is a little bit unknown that is acting in a way which is not really that well explained in the movie.
And the thing is, I've seen other stories about love potions going wrong. I tried to remember specific examples, but I couldn't name anything. But like this whole idea of somebody wishes for somebody to be in love with them, and then it completely backfires and gets out of control. And it usually just means kind of that this person is extremely pushy and just won't let go, right? And becomes kind of really single-minded on just being with this person, right, to the point of being a threat. This movie doesn't have to do that, but it doesn't seem like it had a better idea. It seemed to me a little bit like they kind of just has said, okay, we need to fill this many minutes with Nikki doing weird stuff, and then we're gonna brainstorm, like we're gonna come up with some stuff. And I don't have a clear like idea of what it should have been exactly, but like as I was watching it, I'm just saying, how does this follow from her being obsessed with him? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and to be fair, like kind of everything about how she's acting and how she's sort of maneuvering is quite compelling, and it's like it is actually good viewing for the most part. And I think you can almost like cut the movie some slack for it because there's like you said, there's like other elements of it that are connected and that can be connected really well, so that these smaller elements or these other sections you can kind of forgive a little bit for giving the director slash writer a little bit more kind of creative control to give a feeling to the audience.
Yeah, so one thing it actually reminded me of was Longlegs, because in our review of Longlegs, I said Nicolas Cage gets praised for his loud and eccentric performances, but a lot of the time there isn't really a character behind that. It's just weird for the sake of weird. Nikki is very clearly channeling Longlegs in this, right? Or like most Nicolas Cage characters, because it's just loud and weird and eccentric and shocking. You say we should cut this movie some slack because it's entertaining or because it's creative, but isn't the whole point of showing the consequences of the wish to illustrate that the wish itself was the problem in the first place? That Bear having that wish in the first place is the problem, or is that not the point of the story?
I mean, yes, in a sense, but also I kind of was like, what I actually quite enjoyed about the movie as well was that it didn't try to like show that Bear could have gotten her without the wish. It kind of showed that actually she was sleeping with his best mate behind his back without telling him. And she'd also said to other colleagues how she actually truly felt, and like she didn't actually really like him in that way. So I kind of viewed it as, because again you kind of see the chemistry that he has with Sarah at the end of the movie. Of he was too busy like focused on this girl and like chasing this girl who was clearly not the right one for him, that he actually missed someone that was, I wouldn't say the same level because I'm not trying to put anyone down, but on the same wavelength. They had like chemistry as well on their side. I'm trying to remember the start of the movie as well. Did the start of the movie show that they had good chemistry, but just as friends? which could have been like misunderstood between Nikki and Bear.
It seems to me like Bear has a crush on Nikki. Nikki is pretty indifferent to him and basically just views him as a friend. Sarah has a crush on Bear and he is oblivious to it. And I think you're absolutely right that Sarah is much better for him, and is just a much better person, right? She's much more thoughtful, much more interesting. She actually cares about other people. I think Nikki on her own is not that great a person. Like, she seems to kind of just wander through life, not really caring about anybody by herself. And like, she doesn't harm anybody by it. But like, it seems to me like one of those cases where he has like his interest in her is more about his idea of what Nikki is like as opposed to what she really is like. And in a normal rom-com, he would have pursued Nikki and then realized that Sarah was there right along and was the much better match for him. But then the wish kind of makes like ruins all of that and destroys all of that. And I think one of the most emotionally engaging and gripping moments on all of this is that scene where Sarah and Bear are in the car and she's not even coming onto him or he onto her. They're just having a real moment and a real conversation, and they really care about each other as people. And he's genuinely happy for her having gotten into, or for having, he hasn't opened the letter from the art school yet, but he's happy for her that she's pursuing her dream and he's encouraging her and all of that. And she really cares about him. And she's really concerned about Nikki's behavior, not because she's jealous, but because it's not healthy for any of them, but especially from her point of view, especially for Bear, right? And then Nikki comes out of nowhere, smashes the window, and beats Sarah's head to a bloody pulp, which is, number one, a really effective jump scare. I normally hate jump scares with a passion. I think they're usually really cheap. But here, I think it was really effective, where Nikki just comes out of nowhere with no warning, smashes through the window, grabs Sarah's head and smashes it against the steering wheel until there's no face left. And Bear just has to sit there and watch it.
It was actually a brick. I don't know if you caught that, actually. She had like a brick in her hand and she was just like smashing her face against the brick that was on the steering wheel, which I didn't quite catch until like the end.
I missed that. It's a dark scene, but yeah, like that makes it even worse, right? That makes it even more brutal. But point is, it's the most emotionally engaging scene in the entire movie, and it's ruined by the curse instantly. There's no way out of them in any way. There's nothing any of them could have done differently to prevent this from happening. The minute the curse is in play or the wish is in play, it's all ruined, right? Because on their own, these four crazy kids would have sorted their stuff out, right? And this way, they had no chance.
This movie almost kind of promotes, not like, dating around or whatever like that, but actually it kind of almost promotes like not being obsessed with like one person. And obviously this whole movie is about like, obsession and whatever. But if Bear hadn't been so hyper focused and on his part so obsessed with Nikki, especially because they all work together, it just seemed like his sole focus and the only thing that was on his mind was how he can express how he feels to Nikki. But this movie is almost like saying that, like, speak to more people, like speak to the other people that are around you. One, you don't know how other people like feel about you, but you don't know whether like you might find a better match or like someone might be a better fit for you. And it's not always about how someone looks. It seemed like I'm trying to remember, because like he even had like that whole spiel at the start of the movie where he was pretending to express how he feels to a waitress in the restaurant. And I don't know whether he like mentioned specific like traits or like characteristics that she had about him, but it's like the movie is just kind of almost saying about to, and I think to Gen Z as well. I think kind of to this new generation about just don't be so hyper focused on just like this one person, and like especially when you're like friend zone, like if you just have that conversation with other people, you never know like who you come across.
I think this might be the first movie that actually portrays Gen Z characters in a sympathetic light that I've seen. Like, I'm sure they're out there, but usually, because it's millennials writing movies, Gen Z is usually the weird kids who talk weird and who have who are emotionally maladjusted and who are just weird, right? And it's interesting to see when I see characters like that in movies, they're almost always annoying and I cannot relate to them at all. And they tend to often be very superficial and judgmental and all of that. But here they are really humanized, and all of their problems come down to them being emotionally maladjusted and being unable to talk to anybody. I don't know how realistic this is and how representative this is, but I've kind of got this feeling, and just based on kind of what people talk about and how people talk, is that Gen Z seems to be hyper sensitive to how other people perceive them, which makes a lot of sense if you are the first generation that grew up around social media, or where social media always existed, and where anybody, like anything you do in public, could be recorded anytime, and a hate mob could descend on you. If I grew up in that kind of, like, I was like in my 20 when Facebook came live, right? And I didn't use it. I didn't use social media until many years later. But like this whole idea of everything you do, it gets documented, it gets judged by other people. Like if I did something stupid at 20 or at 17 or something, 3 people knew about it, right? And I could figure stuff out, and I could overcome whatever embarrassment or like was involved without it being remembered forever, right? And it coming up again and again, right? And it seems to me like for Jet this is different. And this movie kind of shows what happens when an entire generation is like this, right? Because in the entire first half movie, like, I'll be honest, I did not have a good time in the first half hour because I kept yelling at them in my head, just talk, just I know it's difficult, I know it's scary, but like there's no other, like the only way out is through. But these people are incapable of confronting anybody, or like even after Bear has made his wish, Nikki essentially just asks him inside, right? And it's actually like she could not show more interest in him, right? And he's still paralyzed and is still afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. And that kind of persists well into the next half hour or so, where he's constantly afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing. It seems to me like the wish is kind of a metaphor for what it would take for people like this to actually have a relationship, and then proceeds to show how non-workable and dysfunctional that would be if you are unable to actually connect to other people and everything remains a fantasy, and then the fantasy actually comes true. Look how awful that would be. It seems to me like that's kind of the ethos that this goes into, and honestly I've not seen this before in another movie in this way.
Again, that's kind of how what I was kind of saying at the top of the review when I was going through initial thoughts, which is like how unique this kind of idea and this sort of premise felt. But just to kind of take it a little bit further back to kind of what you're saying about like the Gen Z characters, I don't know what it was like in your theater, but my theater was just like laughing through so much of what was going on, especially with sort of like how awkward and, you know, how clumsy Bear was with sort of some of his words, and like how he kind of was saying things. And of course, sort of some of the stuff that like Nikki was doing when she was possessed, I was definitely laughing out loud in certain moments. But I don't know, it seemed like my entire theater, who seemed to kind of maybe sway a little bit older. When I say older, I say kind of like more millennial, were just kind of like laughing at these characters. So it's interesting that you say about how Gen Z are more like aware, more hyper aware of like the way that they're viewed and the way that they're perceived. And I think again, like I do agree with you that the way that they're realized in this movie is a lot better than what we've seen in other instances. But I don't know, the theater that I was in was just kind of finding so much humor in pretty much everything that they were doing, and then the way that these characters were behaving in this movie.
So I just looked it up. Curry Barker is 26. That means he's on the older end of Gen Z, I think. And my theater was, I didn't like do an inventory, but it seemed to be like at least 30 and up. I did not notice a lot of 20-somethings in the theater, and it wasn't a very large one. Like it was full, but it was one of the smaller screens, and like just looking around, everybody was 30s to 40s. So this is a movie about Gen Z, made by Gen Z, that is watched by millennials, and the millennials love it. Like this has made currently 23 million at recording, and it was made for less than 1 million. So this is going to be one of the biggest successes on the box office probably this year in terms of multiplier. This is probably going to make this guy's career. The weird thing is, other cheap horror movies, it's mostly Gen Z. And they tend to go to horror movies to laugh at them, even like movies that are meant to be serious. And here we have a very awkward and very cringy movie that tells essentially the story of Gen Z, and it's millennials watching it and they find it funny. It's a weird dynamic. But just to kind of answer your specific question, my theater was fairly quiet during, like they said nothing at all during the awkward first half hour before the wish, where it's kind of just uncomfortable and kind of tedious, and you kind of you're waiting for them to get to the point. And they were laughing out loud in that sequence before Sarah's death, right? So there's like a 20-minute sequence or so where Nikki just does completely unhinged stuff, right? I think it's from the moment where he comes home from work and she's just been standing there soiling herself because she has nothing to do when he's away, right? To the point where, I don't remember, I think when he goes to see Sarah in the middle of the night, right? And Nikki does increasingly weird and eccentric and loud things during that time, and everybody in my theater thought it was funny. I actually didn't think it was funny. It was actually kind of creepy and intimidating, because this is the point where Nikki becomes actively threatening and becomes not manageable anymore, right? Like in the very beginning, you think she's going to be controllable in a way. Like if you put yourself into Bear's position, even if you can't cure her, if you can't end the curse, you still have to live with her, and you might be able to contain the crazy kind of thing. Like that's what it looks like in the beginning, right? Like she's like, as long as you manage how other people interact with her, it might actually work out. And then towards the end, it becomes clear this is not going to be possible. It's impossible to live with this entity, right? That looks and pretends to be Nikki. So I don't know. It had a very different effect on me than it seems to have had on other people, because I actually thought that was kind of the scariest segment, not because of the specific things Nikki was doing, but because of the implication of what position this put Bear in. Because if he wants to move forward, he increasingly will have to do increasingly drastic things to make that happen, which all culminates in he has to kill himself, because he's told repeatedly the only way to end the curse is to either kill her or kill yourself.
That is very interesting. That is very interesting because again, like my theater was more the awkward dating moment, and it was almost like at Bear, like why can't you just like tell her how you feel? And I don't know whether that's just like an older kind of crowd thing where it was a little bit more normal to have like those conversations without kind of like the fear of like and again like the dating landscape's changed where you have like DMs and screenshots and this that and the other and like social media footprint and whatever that you're kind of like afraid of like having some of these conversations or whatever. But kind of keep going. What did we think of like Bear's character? Because at the very start, you know, he makes a wish and credit to the movie, she immediately changes. It's not like she needs to sleep and then the possession takes over. It's like she immediately flips and kind of starts to act a different way towards him. Initially, you probably wouldn't credit it to the wish that he made. So you can kind of give him like some pass initially to be like, it's very crazy that you'd make a wish and the wish actually came true. Like who would even believe that? It becomes very clear after a certain point, and he does even have a conversation with Nikki, who's kind of buried underneath this whatever that's possessed her, that the wish actually has worked and everything that he's kind of doing is against Nikki's will. And having spoken to people that he knows as well, friends of her, he kind of eventually even like understands that Nikki didn't really actually want to be with him. When they have the conversation between them when Nikki's begging to be killed and he says, what's so horrible or what's so like something with loving me or something along those lines. And it kind of like raises like a morality question within something like Bear of like what was his obligation at that point. Obviously he kind of chose to kind of try to like see it through and like try to navigate as best he could with this sort of crazy possessed version of Nikki. But I don't know, there was like an element of it that, you know, slowly became wrong and he was clearly doing something very wrong. And I don't even know if they like if the movie completely questioned it or whether it was just kind of like subtle in sort of in what it picked out. But I don't know, what was your thoughts on all of that and like his character and how he kind of handled his situation?
One thing I actually kind of appreciated about the movie that it kind of skips the question of is Bear doing something moral or immoral, because maybe 20, 30 years ago, a love potion was still something that was played for comedy in movies, right? Where it kind of works out or it's kind of all okay in the end. And then at some point in the 2000s, people realized, no, this is just magic roofies. Love potions are never ethical. They're never a good thing. This is what villains do, right? Like enslaving the mind of somebody to make them love you. Like that's not what heroes do. That's not what sympathetic people do. Just based on the trailer, I was a little bit dreading sitting through 2 hours of this, like where the movie treats it as, oh, have you considered that love potions are bad actually? And that is not what this is, right? Like, and I really appreciate that. I don't think the movie spends very much time on debating whether or not the wish was a good thing. I think the audience and the movie are very clear on the fact that Bear should not have wished for this. Even if it had all worked out, it would not have been real, right? And he realizes this halfway into the movie that nothing Nikki does, like even when she does things he wants, it's not real. And that taints everything. And the movie does not dwell on this. It's not the big moral of the story, I don't think. Instead, it focuses a lot more on Bear's psychology of why he is in that position in the first place, why he is so lonely, right? I think the wish is basically the consequence of him being lonely. And then the first half hour or so, as well as his actions throughout the movie, shine a light on why he is that lonely and why he is incapable of connecting with other people. And I think he's not kind of the standard lonely nerd kind of thing. Like, he's just kind of a fairly normal guy who is just terrified of rejection and terrified of other people and terrified of his own emotions. I think that is kind of what drives all of this. And I think that's what makes Bear so bearable. Because if he was just kind of like somebody who just wants to get with the attractive girl, right? And that's the entirety of it, and that's his entire motivation, it would have been very hard to make him sympathetic, and he would have in fact been the villain in this, right? But I think because he is so clueless and honest and well-meaning, like, he doesn't actually want to hurt anybody, right? He actually does care about Nikki, but he just can't put it into words and actions. Throughout the movie, he's imprisoned by Nikki's actions, but before that, he's imprisoned by his own psychology, I think. And like his character growth comes from actually doing something, like actually having a plan and actually going through with it. And then he doesn't in the end. Like, he takes these pills to end his life because that's the only way to end the curse, and he chickens out at the last minute. And the only reason they both end up dying is because she found the wish willow and wished for them to be together, but at that point he's already poisoned, and he didn't even go through with throwing, like, he didn't have time to throw up the painkillers that he took, so he just dies in her arms, and that ends the curse, and that lifts her curse, right? So I think that's really interesting, and it's not as simple as, oh, like, the wish is bad.
I don't think kind of when I kind of brought it up, I was like referring to the wish being bad, because I think, you know, there is the understanding of that, but I think it's kind of what I was trying to get at was how you were summarizing it. Of initially, he's kind of like terrified of speaking to other people, sort of his emotions, etc., and then he almost kind of gets what he wants inadvertently through the wish, and then it's that element of him realizing what he got and how he got it and all of that stuff, and like you said, it's like there's a kind of like no way out of this apart from either him killing himself or having to kill her, essentially. And it's like that idea of how do you fix the situation, and it's not until it gets like super drastic, and it's not until like it starts to impact other people that he then kind of realizes, or it's not until like it gets like super serious that he realizes, actually, no, I need to like really get a hold of this. Like, everything else he tries to manage and tries to like keep normal, knowing that Nikki's kind of trapped underneath this possessed body. There's this element of the psyche of someone that goes from being a little bit sort of kind of not on the outside, but like, because again, like you said, he's not on the outside. Like, he has friends, he has people that he's close with, but he's just unable to kind of manage his emotions or like handle the rejection, etc. And it's, what would a person like that do? There's like certain like characteristics of him that kind of come into question once he kind of knows that Nikki it's a possessed version of Nikki based on a wish that he made, and having to like fix that.
Yeah, I think it's important that it's not just Bear, it's all of them. Like, all of them have this trouble connecting with other people. Maybe Ian, least of all, like, he seems to be the most outgoing and the most blunt in a way, but all of them have trouble articulating what it is. Like, it's not like Sarah ever made a move on Bear before all of this happened, right? Like, she was kind of admiring from afar the way Bear was kind of crushing on Nikki. Meanwhile, Nikki was oblivious to it and was hooking up with Ian, and like this whole love pentagon kind of thing that they've got going on, that I think is all down to people are not talking about their feelings. And it just so happens that Bear is the one who gets the wish, but it could have been anybody of them. Like, any of them could have walked into that shop and bought one of these. And you can imagine a story in which Sarah has the wish and it's Bear who gets possessed, right? And it would unfold pretty much the same way, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I've got one question, which is, there are 3 wishes, or at least 3 wishes, that are shown in the movie, right? So there's Bear's wish, and then there's Ian, who wishes for $1 billion, and then there's the guy in the shop who says, yeah, I already got my wish, sorry, I can't help you, right? Like, so Bear goes into the shop and basically tries to buy another one wish willow, and is told everybody just gets one wish. And then the salesperson says, you know, I can't help you with undoing your wish because I already got my wish. So Bear seems to be the only one whose wish goes actually bad, because in a lot of these stories, it's the wish itself that's bad. It's not what you do with the wish, but it will always go bad and it always blow up in your face in ways you couldn't predict. So do you think it's deliberate, and what do you think it says that Bear's wish is the only one that actually goes so wrong? Or would they all have gone wrong if we just spent enough time with them?
I'm unsure because Ian's one where he wishes for $1 billion and it just kind of starts to fall from the sky. I actually would have liked that a little bit more if it was more a banking error or something like that, and he just got like $1 billion into his account as opposed to just like more money falling from the sky. But I get the point of why they did it like that in the movie, because he needs to immediately know that, oh, this wish was real, and Bear's actually telling to know the truth behind it. But I don't know. I'd like to I don't think there was like enough time to explore, especially Bear, because like Bear's like maybe like the closest other character that we have in this to like kind of maybe like somewhat see or explore his wish. Nikki, or the possessed version of Nikki's wish, also went bad, but it was maybe not through the wish itself. It was maybe just through the actions and just like the timing of it. So you can't really like attribute it to the wish itself. But you could see a world in which Ian receives $1 billion into his like checking account or bank account, and then all the problems that come with it, because maybe it was like an error, and maybe like he's received money from the wrong type of person, and now like they're after him and they're like, you know, trying to kill his family or kill his whatever to try and get this money back from him, but he's still got his $1 billion essentially. But I don't know, and I think the shopkeeper one was like even more vague than that one, so it's difficult to say.
So the shopkeepers seem to have been just fine. And with Ian, we just see the money falling from the sky. And I was actually expecting Ian to just be killed by the money. Like, because it falls from the sky out of nowhere, hits him on the head, and he drowns in it or something like that. But that didn't happen. We see that one scene where he makes the wish, and then in the next scene, we hear his voice through the door saying, dude, I got $1 billion to check this out. So there's never a negative consequence shown. And then Nikki's wish, I think, was just for Bear to love him, right? She wished for the same thing that Bear wished for. And for a second, it works. And it doesn't actually go bad. The reason it ends in tragedy is because at that point, Bear has already taken the painkiller overdose and is already dying. And so they have like 30 seconds together, and then he dies, and then her curse is lifted. And then she realizes what happened. So I think of the 4 wishes, Bear's is the only one that backfires. And the other ones, the shop attendant is not shown to have had any negative consequences. He seems happy and healthy. He does not seem to have any regrets. He doesn't warn Bear about, oh, don't touch this stuff, it ruined my life, or something like that. So I guess that kind of just means that Bear is uniquely selfish in this, or his wish is uniquely destructive. And maybe it's because it's the wish that involves another person, right? Because Ian just conjures some money out of nowhere. We don't know about the shop assistant. And Nikki does not get enough time with her wish, right? And actually, before Bear dies, I thought the ending was going to be that they were going to be like codependent psychos for the rest of their lives, and they would just starve because they would be so in love that they forgot to eat. You know what I mean? Like that would have been maybe a more poetic ending, as opposed to Nikki kind of being freed and seeing like the consequences of not her actions but Bear's actions. Like, she's completely innocent in all of this, right? Like, nothing she's done she was responsible for because somebody else was driving, right? Like, this is all Bear's fault essentially. So I don't know, it seems weird that the wish only went bad once,
Especially again because and that's why I asked what his actual wish was at the start of this review, because it's not like he made a terrible wish. There could clearly be a world where he makes that wish and it goes well. He asks for her to be most in love with him, and it's a healthy version of love. It's a healthy thing where she respects his boundaries when he wants to go and see like his friends because she loves him, or like, you know, she's okay with him like being away from her and this and the other, and like it's not this level of obsession, but it's more like a partnership or like a mutual like respect, or like whatever you might want to put in there. That's like a healthy version of it. So it's even more weird that his one is the one that has to go bad when it could have easily gone well. That's kind of why I kind of wanted for the way he wished it, or the wording that he used, or something along the lines, to have been what actually made it go bad, as opposed to it just going bad for the sake of going bad. Well, especially if you're going to give us examples of everyone else's working out.
The more I think about it, I think the more it is that it had to involve another person. Because even though we know his state of mind and we know his intentions, like his love for her is genuine. Although I think it would probably evaporate if they actually went on a date, right? Like just without the wish, right? I have a feeling that would not last very long because Nikki doesn't seem to be that interesting or that nice a person just on her own. But in his mind, he idolizes her and he wishes that she would return that affection. And that comes from a positive place, right? But anybody who thinks about this for more than 2 seconds knows that this is slavery, right? Like this is making somebody else a puppet for what you want. If I had a wish, I might be tempted for something like this, but then after 2 seconds of thinking about it, I would realize, no, this would never be real. Like I would maybe, like I have to pick something else that doesn't involve somebody else becoming a tool for my happiness. Him not realizing this is maybe a little bit contrived because in 2026, I don't know that anybody would not realize this, or maybe that somebody like Bear wouldn't realize it. I think the reason it goes bad is because it has to involve coercing somebody else.
Yeah, I can accept that explanation because the movie doesn't quite say one way or the other either ways.
I don't think the movie really thinks that far. And I think that's kind of probably the biggest problem with this is that it just explores kind of the initial consequences of the wish and shows them to be disastrous. But it doesn't seem to me like it goes very far in actually exploring the idea, because that's kind of what I expected going in, that this would be like a Stepford wife kind of thing where she's on the surface the perfect girlfriend, right? Like adores him, like laughs at every joke, like approves of everything he does, is always there for him, all of that. And then it dawns on him that this is a puppet, right? Like this, you've created a toy, essentially. There's nobody on the other side, and therefore it's not real. And that's not really where this goes, right? Like, and I think it didn't have to, but that's kind of the obvious place to go. But it then also doesn't really, like, for instance, it doesn't really explore why his wish is different from everybody else's wish and why one is fine and the other is not, for instance. Like, it just doesn't go there.
Especially where one's wish for $1 billion and, the other one's kind of impacted someone else. Did we need to understand or explore the possession a little bit more, or like the entity that possessed Nikki a little bit more, or like have an understanding of like where it even came from and why it behaved the way it behaved in the end? Or I'm trying to think whether that like improves, because like in these type of movies, I always think that I'd like to just kind of try to understand the entity a little bit more and understand like why it is the way it is and like why it does what it does. But especially if like someone can wish for $1 billion and it just comes out of thin air and there isn't any like kind of like soul or evil spirit attached to it, why would there be like a spirit attached to this particular wish?
There being an entity in the first place is a bit weird. It seems to add a complication that number one is not explored, and number two seems to throw a wrench into this. Like, this is not Nikki being coerced to do and say these things. This is her body being taken over by some kind of demon or spirit. And there are moments where the spirit goes away and she can briefly be herself again. I think she comes out twice. Once, like in the middle of the night, where she says, don't wake her up. And then the other one was where there seems to be like a brief moment of lucidity where she's herself for like 5 seconds and then the spirit comes back. I think because Bear says something that triggers like a negative response or something like that. I don't know what this adds to the story, that this is not Nikki, right? But something else that just looks like her or inhabits her body. I don't know that that ties into like the idea or the spirit or the message of the movie at all. I don't know.
Yeah, unsure. I don't know whether you said you liked or you didn't like, but I did quite like how they kind of made her feel a little bit different, like whenever she became possessed, in terms of she'd be like in the shadows or they'd be speaking and she'd be like further away and you like could barely see her face and stuff like that in certain shots, not in every shot, but in certain shots where like they're having conversation and like it's just like everything around like her facial features is just like darkened, etc. I don't know, I like those elements of how they kind of decided to portray the entity within her.
Yeah, and I kind of mentioned that earlier in the conversation, and that seems to be a little bit unmotivated, where it does not seem to be an expression of what's going on with Nikki. It's just weird and creepy and scary. And I don't know, like maybe I missed something, but that's what it seems to be.
Yeah. Any other points?
Yeah, so one last question I had is that this was made for less than $1 million. So Wikipedia says budget was between $750,000 and $1 million. And the box office at recording is at just over 23 million. We're recording this Sunday evening of the first weekend. So this is going to go higher. And I was in a full theater, and it sounds like your theater was pretty busy as well. This is cleaning up, right? And I'm not sure why this is. Like, this is not even the second weekend. It's not even like a bunch of people went to see it and are telling everybody else how amazing this is, and therefore people go in the second weekend. This is just hitting it out of the park. So the trailer to me seemed nothing special, and I haven't seen any of the other marketing. And I have no idea why people are showing up for this when they didn't show up for Hokum, for instance, just a week ago, or for any number of other low budget, heightened horror movies that talk about deep emotional issues, right? Like, this is not like a fun slasher movie for the kids to make fun of. This presents itself as a mature and emotional horror movie in the first place, but those come out every other week, and most of them are ignored, and they only make a profit because their budget was so low. And here, not only is the budget even lower at less than 1 million, but also it makes way more than most other movies.
I kind of half like theorized that there was a lot of couples in the theater that I was in. And I wonder whether it's like this idea of someone being kind of so in love with sort of the other person and the horrors that could come from that, that just like has this attraction to couples to sort of kind of go out to watch this movie. And I don't know what it's like in all theaters, but it's almost like an easy conversation sort of to have in a couple of like, oh, did you see the trailer for this movie where like this person is like so in love with this like other person, like how it goes wrong or whatever, and like, oh, like that might be cool, we can go check that out. But yeah, I don't know, like my theater was like dominated with couples. I just wonder whether that element had something to do with it.
Now that you mention it, there seem to be quite a few couples, and normally horror movies, budget horror movies, tend to be either people on their own or groups of friends. And here it seemed to be mostly couples that I saw. Yeah, so that might be it. So it's already made more, like in terms of movies we've talked about this year, it's made more money in absolute terms than How to Make a Killing, They Will Kill You, Hokum, Strangers Chapter 3, and Cold Storage. It's about to overtake The Bride and inching in towards Primate and Return to Silent Hill. I'm just observing that this movie made way more money than other movies like it have in the first weekend. It doesn't seem like the couple theory is what seems to explain it, because it seems to me like horror is not the go-to for couples, right? Like the drama made 125 million, which is a lot for a movie like this, and that made a very healthy box office ratio. I think it certainly has something to do with that, and just looking around the theater, that theory bears out. It's just a little bit surprising in general that this is not just like, there are other good horror movies out there, right? And like, I think this is better than Hokum, like quality wise, but even Hokum was fairly good, and that didn't make anywhere near like as much. Either way, it's an outlier, is just what I'm saying.
Without kind of like interviewing some people outside of the theaters, you wouldn't know.
Yeah. And Rotten Tomatoes are like 94 for both categories. So it's just, everybody loves this. Like, critics love this, but critics loving something has very little bearing on box office. This is a small original movie that is about something, and it's emotionally rich, and it's well acted, and all of that. And those are all ingredients for a box office flop under normal circumstances, right? Like, we constantly bemoan how good original stories are being ignored and don't even get a chance, right? It's not even like a bunch of people check them out and it's not that great. No, actually, nobody actually goes because it's not a franchise. This has no known actors, right? Like, I don't know that any of these actors, like half of them don't have Wikipedia pages. They all seem to be fairly unknown, right? Because they're like early to mid 20s, right? So none of them are well known. Like, there's no names attached to this, like, unless Curry Barker is just, I don't know, huge on YouTube or something. I don't know. But there's not a franchise, and there's no names attached to this that make this stand out in any way. Just if you're just looking at movie posters and you're looking for something to see, I don't know how this is different from anything else. Just what I'm saying.
I guess that would be one of the mysteries for 2026, I guess. But good for the movie. I mean, I was quite shocked when you said it had a £1 million budget, but I don't know. Good for the movie. Happy that they were able to make a really good, enjoyable movie on such a low budget and sort of be rewarded for doing so.
So first of all, it's $1 million, not £1 million. It's like more like £600,000. So this is nothing. One of the things we often talk about is how the budget is way out of line for a lot of these. Like the drama was made for 30 times this. The Bride was made for almost 100 times this. Hokum was made for like 6 times this, and that didn't have any expensive actors in it either, and had like 2 locations. The Strangers was made for 10 times this. Even in the realm of low budget horror, this is nothing. Like, this is almost Blair Witch Project territory, right? Where you make a movie for nothing at all, and then it just hits a nerve and it finds an audience, and you make like hundreds of times your budget. This might hit a multiplier of 60 to 70, probably. I think that's realistic. I'm gonna keep watching this. I want to see how far this goes. And I'm happy that an original story that is about something that is well acted, well written, well shot, well directed, everything is just succeeding. Because normally we watch these movies fail. Like Cold Storage was not a great movie, but it was enjoyable and absolutely worth a watch. And that made like a multiplier of 0.0. Like it doesn't even hit the 0.1 multiplier. A lot of the time, these movies are just ignored by audiences in the first place. And this wasn't. And I'm surprised, but it's a happy surprise.
I guess with that, last thoughts?
Yeah, so overall, I really enjoyed this. I think the acting specifically carries this, and the performances, I think, are very strong. I do think it's dragged down by the specifics of the possession, not saying all that much other than being weird and shocking and creepy. And I think if it had been, and if it had said a little bit more about the implications of Bear's wish, as opposed to just getting out of hand, because that's kind of what it is, I think this would have been even stronger. But I think this is really carried by mostly Bear's, but also the other characters, like their emotional reaction to what is going on. Absolutely worthwhile. One of the stronger movies I've seen this year. That's a 5 out of 6.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of echo what you said there. Even though they did choose to go with the vibes and the feel over kind of exploring some things a little bit further, I think it worked. It worked a charm, it worked a treat. I definitely felt what the writer and the director were trying to kind of go for, and it provided some surprise laughs throughout it as well, which is always welcome as well. So I think with that, I'll give it a good 7.5 out of 10. I guess with that, we've come to the end of today's episode. As always, if you reach this part of the episode, we appreciate you giving us a listen, checking us out, and just genuinely rocking with us. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a whole bunch of nonsense, then I've got the perfect wish for you. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Bye-bye.